Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is lovely to see so many people here. I'm watching the participant list up and up, but I think I'm okay to go with these introductory remarks. So this is the fourth event in the series of A New Vision for Land Use in Scotland, 6 conversations organised by the Scottish Ecological Design Association. And I'm Francesca Wazowska, I'm Chair of Nature Scot, and I'm really delighted to chair this conversation, which focuses on the health benefits from nature. These conversations, which have been organised in collaboration with the James Hutton Institute, are looking at new ways to manage Scotland's landscape, because we know that we need radical change if we are to address the twin crises of nature degradation and climate change, as well as many of the issues around food security and loss of diversity. As well as that, there are many benefits, and indeed natural benefits and health benefits from the land, from our landscapes, from nature, including health and well-being of those living and working in the countryside, as well as those visiting. Now, I know many of you that are joining us today have been to these conversations before, so I'll try and not repeat identically the introductions from other conversations, but I think it is worth underlining that this is an absolute apposite time to have this discussion as we think about the future of our land, as we think about land reform, we think about the work of the Scottish Land Commission, and we look forward to major UN conferences on biodiversity and climate change this year. Now, today's conversation, as I've said, is titled Natural Benefits, and it addresses nature's impact on health. Now COVID-19 has been a situation that none of us would have dreamed of. But one of the potential benefits or opportunities that we've seen in Nature Scot is that more people have benefited and accessed nature. We've undertaken surveys that have showed people's engagement with nature has increased over this time. And for many people, their reason for engaging with nature, for enjoying green space and the countryside, has been to do with their health, physical and mental health, and their well-being. And that's a fantastic opportunity on which to build. But we also know that there are challenges in this increased access to the countryside. We've seen some challenges of behaviour. We've seen issues around people not understanding how they can go about enjoying what is on their doorstep, as well as thinking about how we can make nature accessible to all people across Scotland and all that visit. How do we eliminate inequalities in people's access to nature? And this conversation will explore some of these tensions, but also hopefully explore the opportunities and come up with some specific calls for action for the future, so that we can all take pride in the land, so that we can all help increase biodiversity and address climate issues. Now, the conversation will be divided into 3 parts. There'll be a main speaker who I'll introduce shortly, 2 responders. There'll be then a discussion across a panel, and we'll conclude with questions from the audience. Now, in between the sessions, there are interludes from talented artists who feel passionately about rural Scotland, and these pieces have been chosen to resonate with the topic. So please, if you can, stay and enjoy these artistic interludes. We do understand if people need to take a short break, but please try and stay with these sessions, because they are beautiful. In terms of how the event will work and in terms of audience controls, we have disabled your video and audio function. Sorry about that, but it just means the event will run smoother. The event will be recorded and will be posted on the CEDA resources page. So please give yourself a name and you can do that by amending your profile in Zoom by clicking on the 3 dots in your own window on your screen. And that means if you ask a question, you will be identified. The chat box will be open throughout the event, and so use that to provide comments and general queries which can be picked up by our back of house team. And we would remind you that the chat is public, and the transcript will be available after, so don't put in there anything that you wouldn't wish others to see. Separately from the chat box, there is a Q&A function, and that will form the basis of the third part of the programme. So please submit your questions, and perhaps listen to some of the speakers first before you do that, but submit your questions by the end of the second interlude, and the panel will discuss these in the third part of the programme. So that is all the housekeeping. Please sit back, and I hope you enjoy the stimulating conversation which will take place in the next 2 hours. To start us off, I'd like to introduce our first artistic piece, which is from Karine Porwart, The Lost Words Blessing. In 2018, Robert McFarlane and Jackie Morris produced a book called The Lost Word Spells. The prompt for this book was the editing of the Oxford Junior Dictionary and the removal of many words to describe things of nature, such as acorn, bluebell, otter, and kingfisher. And this song, The Lost Words Blessing, was written in Scottish Gaelic folkloric form by a group of European musicians to mark the passing of these words. So can I now hand over to Karine, please? Thank you.
Enter the wild with care, my love, and speak the things you see. Let new names take and root and thrive and grow. And even as you travel far from heather, crag and river, may you, like the little fisher, set the stream alight with glitter. May you enter now as otter, without falter, into water. Look to the sky with care, my love, and speak the things you see. Let new names take and root and thrive and grow. And even as you journey on, past dying stars exploding like the gilded one in flight, leave your little gifts of light. And in the dead of night, my darling, find the gleaming eye of starling, like the little aviator. Sing your heart to all dark matter. Sing the things you see. Let new names take and root and thrive and grow. And even as you stumble through Macher sands eroding, let the fern unfurl your grieving. Let the heron still your breathing. Let the silky swim you deeper. Little silver seeker, even as the hour grows bleaker, be the singer and the speaker, and in city and in forest,
That was absolutely beautiful, and what a fantastic start to our evening. Now, one of the terrible jobs I have during this event is to try and keep us to time. And we are on a really tight schedule this evening. We've got so much to cram in. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our main speaker, Sarah Ann Munoz. Sarah Ann is a health geographer with expertise in qualitative and participatory research. In 2018, she was awarded the title of Reader in Rural Health and Wellbeing by the University of the Highlands and Islands, and knows so much about the interaction of nature and health. We're looking forward to hearing from you, Sarah Ann, and the provocations that you might present us with. So now over to you, Sarah Ann. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks very much, Francesca. I'm delighted to be able to contribute to the conversation today, with some reflections on those relationships between nature and health. As you say, I'm a health geographer, so I'm really interested in those relationships between health, well-being and place, particularly in the rural context. And that's an interest that I have at different scales. So from thinking about health in rural regions, down to towns, villages, and really the kind of smaller spaces of our everyday lives, like our homes, gardens, our countryside, woodlands, beaches, etc. So I guess as a qualitative researcher, I'm particularly interested in what types of spaces and places make us feel healthy, and where do different people experience sensations of health and well-being. So I wonder if we could bring up the first of the images that I had sent through, which is around a topography of well-being. So one of the things I'm particularly interested in using as a geographer are mapping techniques. And if we can map where people experience different aspects of well-being, it allows us to construct these type of topographies of well-being. This is an example from a project looking at rural social enterprise and how it generates well-being for individuals. And this topography, it represents one particular aspect of well-being within the indoor and the outdoor spaces of that rural social enterprise. And this particular example looks at the well-being aspect of integration or our connection with other people. So I think we can take that image down. Thank you. I guess this type of interest that I have in how well-being is experienced by individuals over space is what led me really to a fascination with that relationship between natural landscapes, the outdoors, and health and well-being. And there are lots of really interesting questions from the research literature. For example, why is it that hospital patients who have a view of green space out the window actually heal quicker than people who don't have that view of nature? Interesting questions around why children who spend more time outdoors and in natural landscapes go on to become more active and healthier adults later in life. And for me, really, that key question of why some types of natural landscape are experienced as healthy by individuals and become associated with notions of health and well-being within our communities and our society and culture. So there's really quite a large body of research evidence that says green spaces and natural landscapes and features are good for people. And I think that's something we've known for a long time. We can see evidence of this association going back in history, thinking about things like Victorian spa towns, for example. And I wanted just to give you a quote, which is from the archives of the Grantown Society, Grantown on Spey, which I think really illustrates this historical understanding of the relationships between health and place. And it's called medical appreciation. And it's attributed to Sir Andrew Clark, who was a 19th century Scottish physician. And he declared that Granton-on-Spey was the sanatorium of the British Isles. So he said, Granton-on-Spey is the finest nerve tonic that a doctor could possibly prescribe for anybody. The Strathspey air suits both extremes of life. Infants and children thrive on it, and octogenarians are common. It quickly restores the muscles and the nerves, and it establishes a reserve of strength, which is sufficient to keep one going for some time. And he continues that Granton-on-Spey is ideal for those in search of good health. There were no factories or chemical works to disturb the whispering of nature. He suggests that there's no finer retreat for the jaded businessman throughout the length and breadth of Britain, for here he can rest quietly and peacefully and rebuild his balance of nervous energy. Chest troubles of all sorts simply disappear in the presence of good fresh air, and owing to the gravelly nature of the subsoil, rheumatic afflictions are ameliorated. And thinking back in this type of historical awareness of the impact of nature, psychiatric hospitals, for example, as well, have often been associated with outdoor spaces and an immersion in the landscape, an active immersion in the landscape for patients that's seen as beneficial for their health and recovery. So thinking about our contemporary times, I feel there's been a resurgence really in interest in both research and policy, looking at this relationship between the outdoors and health. So I'd like to consider some of that more contemporary research as well. If we bring up image number 2, that would be super, thank you. So I was going to start by just mentioning a project that we were involved with NHS Forth Valley and the Forestry Commission, which was almost 10 years ago now. We looked at the large green space which was or is adjacent to the Forth Valley Royal Hospital and how it might be used to increase health and well-being. And one of the first things we did in that project was to engage some of the clinicians working within the hospital in looking at that academic evidence base. The list there on the right-hand side of the screen, this is a high-level summary of a systematic literature review, looking at the benefits of spending time in hospital-adjacent green space. And one of the consultants within our workshop was considering this and said, gosh, if that was a pharmaceutical or a pill that could deliver all of these outcomes, we would be literally prescribing that to everyone. And on the left-hand side there, you can see just another example of our use of some mapping techniques. We used that to understand how hospital staff, but also the local residents felt about this kind of suburban green space. And some of the words that they stuck on to the map there were things like, it's a relaxing space, quiet, somewhere to escape, to reminisce. People did use words like muddy, dark and frightening as well for some areas. So I think we can take image 2 down, thank you. I think this it illustrates that, you know, actually the vast majority of research around green space and health, it's being conducted in this type of urban or suburban context, and it considers the health and well-being benefits of spending time within that type of urban park or urban woodland space. From that research, there's 3 key ways in which green space is linked to health benefit. And firstly, it's that provision of a space to recharge or relax or de-stress. Secondly, it's about the provision of a space where people are undertaking movement or physical activity. And thirdly, it's about providing a space where people can connect with each other and social interaction is occurring. And it's the combination of these things that generates the positive health and well-being impacts for individuals. So this type of natural space, natural landscape, becomes thought of as an intrinsically healthy landscape. So in the health geography literature, we would talk about these types of spaces as therapeutic or therapeutic landscapes. And they're traditionally landscapes that involve natural features such as woodland, beaches, lakes, mountains. So obviously many of the features that we would find in our rural areas. But after the body of work around urban green space, really the next largest body of work looking at green space and health is concerned with the consumption of rural areas, often by urban or suburban populations for therapeutic benefits. And those studies show that people coming into rural areas to participate in things like nature-based interventions, environmental volunteering, green gyms, or care farming, that they experience therapeutic effects and improvements essentially to both mental and physical health. But we can see that these types of nature-based interventions, they're often provided by the public sector or the charitable sector. But I wonder whether we could think about whether the success of these interventions suggests a greater potential for rural natural health activities to be structured or to be sold by rural social enterprises or rural businesses. So a question we might like to consider is whether there's a greater potential to literally sell health benefits of our rural landscapes. And I think we do this to some extent already in things like marketing the beauty of rural landscapes and opportunities for tourism and recreational users to do things like walking, hiking, cycling. But my question is could we go further in kind of marketing and selling these opportunities? And I think there's some interesting initiatives that I've come across recently. For example, people paying to undertake an artistic residency in a rural area, or paying for the opportunity to come and work on rural land. And that's partly in order for them to receive these associated physical and mental health effects of being immersed within a rural landscape. But I am based within a department of rural health, and I think one of the key questions for me is around how rural residents and people working within rural environments connect with these types of landscape, and is that connection happening in the same kind of way? Essentially, if people are living and working within these therapeutic landscapes, I wonder, are they continually receiving this therapeutic effects, or might there be different contextual factors that are kind of buffering that positive impact? And in some of the qualitative research that I've been involved with, where we're speaking to rural residents and speaking to rural workers, I think we've been finding that relationship between landscape and health can be different for people who live within those rural spaces. An example that often comes up is around the town of Fort William, and how that's a centre really for outdoor tourism. It's surrounded by landscapes that, according to the evidence base, should be experienced as therapeutic, but it's actually somewhere that's got some of the worst health inequality statistics within Highland. And in talking to Fort William residents, we can see that for some of those people at least, the landscape around them is something they consider to be for tourists. It's not something that they consider to be for their own use. And there's also really interesting international research and literature coming out in this area. And in particular looking at these connections for rural residents and rural workers. I'm thinking about studies in Australia, Canada, and the United States in particular. And they're starting to illustrate how therapeutic effects of natural landscape can be mediated by an engagement in land-based work. Also by the effects of climate change and the experience of natural disaster. Something that stands out for me is the work coming out of Australia, particularly looking at impacts of drought and bushfire, and how these have had really large negative impacts on mental health and resilience, particularly of farmers, but also of the wider rural communities that they're part of and that have connections to agriculture. And there are also studies looking at the impact of flooding. Some work coming out of Asia, for example, looking at how rural residents have required psychological support for post-traumatic stress disorder after experiencing the impact of flooding and natural disaster. So I think for me, there's a consideration here that one's feelings towards a rural landscape, your relationship with a rural landscape can be very different when your livelihood is embedded within that space, and that it's intimately tied to the sustainability of your family and your community that you live within. Building on that discussion around particularly the Australian literature, there's also interesting conversations around a loss of connection to land. And I think it's most prominent in studies around Indigenous populations in Australia and Canada, where they talk about how a loss of ancestral land links to a loss of feeling of connection to land and subsequent feelings of hopelessness and a loss of control. And I think, although it's clearly a very different situation, I do wonder if that's got anything to say about that situation in places like Fort William, where there's potentially a commercialisation of the rural, and is that associated with a sense of loss of control or loss of connection for rural residents. And there's also a small but growing literature that's looking at how community land ownership in rural areas might be associated with positive health and well-being outcomes. So I think all of these things, they link back to that study, that type of study that we did at Forth Valley Royal Hospital, because it demonstrated for us that for people to use a green space or a natural landscape, they needed to feel that that was a legitimate thing for them to do, that it was actually okay for them to enter into that space. So to encourage use, we had to not only look at physical barriers to access, but also what some of the social and cultural barriers to access might be. So living beside a natural area, knowing it's there, knowing it's good for you, is not enough to necessarily encourage everyone to use it. They need to feel some sense of legitimacy, some sense of ownership, of connection, of a sense that is in some way their space to use. I guess thinking then again of the more rural context, there is research that's shown a connection with rural landscape and natural features can be really beneficial for rural residents, and that's particularly when they're experiencing physical or mental ill health. So I'll maybe bring up the third of my images, if that's okay. Because I think the story of the old Craig Denane Hospital, psychiatric hospital in Inverness, and the new Craig's Hospital, which was built pretty much adjacent to the old site, is a really fascinating example. So in this context, there are two Scottish geographers that again, were probably about 15 years ago now, kind of explored the feelings of patients who had moved from the old site across to the new site. And they really found that this connection to nature in the old hospital site was very important to patients' sense of hope for recovery. And this was missing in the much more clinical and sanitary outdoor spaces of the new hospital. You can see were essentially just kind of large areas of lawn. And so a good number of years later, I was involved in some work that was looking at how to transform those outdoor spaces and to connect them back to the more natural features, encourage patients to get outside, to be active, and participate in things like gardening and maintenance, as well as to have the ability to spend time for contemplation surrounded by natural features. So I think really for people coming from all over Highland, the provision of natural features and an ability to see nature change and for new life to flourish within natural spaces, it was comforting to them, but it was also really intimately tied to patients' own notions of hope for their own recovery from mental ill health. So thank you. We can take the third image down. So I'm just going to finish up with a couple of final thoughts. I guess my provocation to the conversation is really how can, but also how should rural landscapes be utilised to facilitate health and well-being for people who live within them, but also for those who may be coming in for recreational or touristic purposes. So there's that contention that rural community land ownership might facilitate health, but how else might we generate feelings of ownership and legitimacy of use of these spaces? And there's also a contention that perhaps the rural landscape could play a bigger role within the delivery of health promoting services to rural populations themselves, not just in the hospital environment, but also through activities like social prescribing and the use of nature-based interventions that would suit the kind of social and cultural connection that rural communities have with the landscape and the areas where they're resident. So I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Sarah Ann, thank you very much. That was absolutely fantastic. And as a neighbour of the Craigdonane Hospital in Inverness, it was really brilliant to see that final image. Just in terms of people making comments, and it's fantastic to see all the comments coming through on the chat. Thank you very much. If you wouldn't mind just checking that your comments are being directed to panelists and attendees. If you have that set to panelists only, then it is just the panelists who will see that and the back of house team, whereas I'm sure many of these comments you want the whole audience to see, so we can get a dialogue going through the chat. And partly that's because by the end of this conversation, we do want to end up with some actionable propositions, some key actions that we can try and present to decision makers and take forward. So thank you for doing that. I'm going to move swiftly on. We're a little bit behind time, no pressure to my fellow panelists. So we will move swiftly on to hear from our two responders. And first of all, I am going to ask Dr. Rahima White to respond to what she's heard. Rahima works in the governance of natural resources, including knowledge and sustainable development. She works at the School of Geography and Sustainable Development at the University of St Andrews and Learning for Sustainable Scotland, and is currently exploring sustainable land use strategies to co-design collaborative solutions to sustainability challenges. Rahima, over to you.
Thank you very much. So, and thank you, Sarah Ann, for such an interesting talk. It's quite hard to know where to find an entry point. But I think I'd like to start by saying that some of my work follows on from the fact that perhaps we're not looking here at nature as offering an add-on, but rather nature is fundamental to who we are as human beings and to us to be able to fill our potential and to be able to feel well. And I think that perhaps just switches things around very slightly from trying to offer some interventions to ensuring that everybody has some access to nature, and then strengthening and deepening those for different kinds of experiences. So Sarah Ann mentioned different ways in which people might engage in nature through different interventions, and some of these are about being in nature. Some of these are perhaps about working with others in nature. Some of these are seeing nature from a health perspective. But I'd like to open up the idea that there are different additional experiences that we can have in nature which might influence our well-being in different ways. So some of these, for example, are exercises where people can relearn how to open up their senses, how to listen to the bird song, how to really see those seasonal changes. And this is not a passive state of being in nature, but a much, much closer engagement with nature. Those who work in nature obviously see those kinds of changes, and they're very much embedded within those changes and the more physical aspects of them. There's also increasingly, we see in Scotland this kind of exercise challenge in nature, people who are trying to do more extreme sports. So whether that be mountain biking, whether that be kayaking, whether that be expeditions, and the kind of mental and almost spiritual challenge that can give as well as the physical. So that's just adding a little bit to those different kinds of experiences. Just thinking also about experiences is the micro experience. So I would like to say that it's not just the big landscapes in nature that can support well-being benefits, but also some of the micro aspects. So even if you have some plants nearby and you're able to bring some nature in, whether it be pictures, whether it be plants, that can also support well-being in different kinds of ways. Additional points there are to think about learning opportunities, and particularly how nature can support well-being and learning in young people. So Richard Lowe spoke about nature deficit disorder, and that's something that we have tried in this Western world to overcome through supporting nature connection for our young people. Could I have the first image, please? So I work and live fairly close to Falkland Estate, and I've been lucky enough to be able to explore there in different kinds of ways. And that's an excellent example of a place where people go for different reasons. They go to be with other people. Young people go to explore. There are community ventures there. There's a lot of dog walking going on there. And there are, of course, challenges in how people like to experience nature in these different ways in these Scottish places. If I can have the second image now, please. So Sarah Ann also mentioned how there are three main ways that are documented as to how nature inspire these well-being benefits. And that's the sense of calm and the sense that the sort of beauty that you get from being in nature. It's also the physical activity, and it's also the social connection. But increasingly, we're starting to find that there's an additional way that nature can support well-being, and that's through a sense of awe, which some people call a type of eco-spirituality. Others say it's very much about uncovering our eco-identity and about us as human beings finding our space within a much wider ecosystem that also includes human beings, and that this can be very beneficial to mental and spiritual well-being. Could I have the third image, please? I think the final point that I would like to make, which I think is perhaps useful to this discussion, is that we shouldn't only be considering what nature does for us, but also what we do for nature. And one of the outcomes of people connecting more with nature, engaging more with nature, gaining well-being benefits, is that they are then more likely to conserve nature. And David Attenborough may have said this, but there's a lot of scientific evidence as well that you can get pro-sustainability behaviours after nature experiences. So I think one of the challenges we have in Scotland at the moment is providing opportunities for people to connect with nature, and then building that into a positive cycle of them in turn supporting nature in different kinds of ways. This is a challenge we're seeing, as I said, at Falkland at the moment, where people are moving back out into the estate during COVID time, but we really want to try and bring them together and get them to understand the responsibilities that they have along with the right of being in nature there. I'm going to leave it there for just now and pass back to you, Francesca. Thank you.
Thank you, Rahima. Very stimulating. I'm going to move us straight on to the next responder, who is Andrew McCormick. Andrew is a beef and sheep farmer in the southwest of Scotland and sits on various boards. Former president of the National Farmers Union for Scotland, and has done much work related to climate change and agricultural commission. So Andrew, be great to hear your thoughts.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that. Is my camera working? Hello?
Not just yet, it was on, but we seem to have lost your visual. There we are, we've got you now.
I'm trying to keep up with the technology for all that I'm involved with a whole lot of other things. But thanks, Chair. I'm going to develop more of how we can get access to the land. And I think it's, I don't believe there's any question to be asked about the value of people entering into the countryside and getting the benefit of being part of what's nature out there. But I like to think, and a lot of my focus has always been about well-being, is actually the people that's involved and what the implications are for those people. To my mind, I'm being simplistic, there's two groups of people. There's one wanting, needing access to the land, and we've also got people that are actually farming the land, that are living on the land, and that they believe that they're the custodians of the countryside of nature and are invested as land manager in its health. Man as a species, I would say, has evolved, I would say, since the Industrial Revolution, an attitude of being outside nature. Creating and building infrastructure, large cities, combustion engines, you name it, it's all been happening, and driving a consumerism paradigm that shoves nature aside. Living in an artificial, unsympathetic environment creates stress and disillusion, smothered by, I would say, inescapable technology. One of the figures I heard recently was that the average American spends 10 hours in front of the screen, social media, whatever it is, but 10 hours in front of the screen, they're bound to be needing access to what we're doing in nature. I think I see this as a global credit card we're being wantonly consuming and not paying back on, recklessly spending our natural capital or our natural credit card, and we're all being called in now to do the payback. And people, I would say, I'm going to say people, it's covering everybody here, it's quite rightly seeking escapism to the countryside and the natural environment, all but their most recent forebears were involved in over millennia. And I think Sarah Ann mentioned that earlier. It's where we've got to. It's the way we're living now. I don't believe that accessing the countryside is a panacea for mental well-being crisis. I believe that it's an avenue, it's an intervention in itself, but there's a lot more to it than that. And we really should be addressing, I would say, before we get to this stage, the bigger question of what is the cost rather than the cure. But that isn't for here today. So how do we access the countryside? Well, we've had the Land Reform Scotland Act in place since 2003, which has introduced new rights and responsibilities of public access to the countryside. And these are upheld and managed in the ground by local authorities and national park authorities. And beneath that sits, and this is to me the important bit, the Outdoor Access Code, which clearly sets out the rights and responsibility of land managers and those exercising access to the countryside. There's a well-marked core path network, and every local authority should have an access officer in their staff body. Responsible access already exists, I believe, and I think it's something that I'll develop it further on. I don't think and I don't believe there's any need for further regulation. It feels to me if we bring in further regulation, we'll actually be adding layers on, the same as what's happening within Crofton law, and it's not going to foster any awareness or best practice if we do any of that. During this pandemic, we've seen a lot more people accessing our beautiful countryside, and they're welcome. But as a land manager, I've seen and heard a lot more distressing stories of disrespect of this natural environment, with the detritus and damage a few leave behind from their visits, spoiling it for the majority, something Sarah Ann touched on earlier on. To me, the real thing is we must promote education, especially the Outdoor Access Code. This should be a primary aim and outcome from what the likes of this conference is actually going to deliver. There should be no conversations on access rights without the responsibility of those rights in view. Proper responsible access also could give opportunities to educate both the public, farmers, crofters, with an insight into how the food they consume is produced and the standards it is produced to. The recognition of what climate change mitigation that land managers involved in and can do and want to do more of. It also creates a link with locally produced food and seasonality. This positivity will contribute to well-being both when in the countryside, but when also enjoying locally sourced food at home when you're not in the countryside. Farmers, crofters do not have a good track record. And Sarah Ann again mentioned the stress in Australia and that, but it's here in this country. When it comes to our own well-being as farmers and crofters, we have one of the worst suicide rates of any industry in the UK. And that again was a question Sarah Ann was asking. Alongside fatal accidents, farmers represent 1% of the working population, yet 22% of workplace deaths. A lot of this is going to be associated with mental health. Farmers and crofters getting the chance to explain and highlight to the public all that they are doing for nature and wanting to do more of, instead of being vilified, could also be beneficial in reducing those statistics. Farmers are often working in isolation under stressful and challenging conditions on many levels, financial, regulatory, physically. The opportunity to actually engage with the public and explain to the public what they're doing would be really, I would say, a big step forward for both sides of the argument here. It's not an argument, but both sides of the demand on land. Farm businesses must be provided with an insight and options via advice and support, where there may be opportunities in agritourism, conservancy, diversification. Again, this was hinted at earlier on even health benefit diversifications that could shine a light on well-being for both visitors, practitioners and other rural landscapes, and generate respect for each other's ambition for the countryside. I think I'll end by saying, to me, there's a great big education job needing to be done. And at the back of this, there's also needing to highlight to land managers how they can actually deliver more for more people and for themselves at the same time. So I think I'll stop on that note, Chair. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Andrew. And there's some great kind of dilemmas coming through this conversation. So the difference between rights and responsibilities, the challenges of increased access to nature, both from the benefits it brings, but some of the challenges that Andrew has mentioned. Should we be paying for green space given the health benefits that it derives? And we will get into all of that after the next interlude, which is from Rachel Marsh. Rachel is an author and writing instructor living in Scotland. She is reading an extract from Braemania, A Village's Story of Nature and Myth. So Rachel, I'm going to hand over directly to you. Okay, slight change of plan. Unfortunately, Rachel has not been able to join us just yet. We're hoping to get her later on. She's a working instructor, and I think one of her classes has run on. So we're going to go to our next interlude, which is from Jill de Fresnes and Ruth Barry, and is Among the Trees, The Foresters of Gosford Estate, which is a short film featuring foresters. So can I hand over to this interlude, please? Just wondering if the back of house team have the Jill and Ruth Foresters of Gosford Estate ready. Okay, change of plan again. Who says we can't be flexible in this online environment in which we live? So I'm going to introduce our remaining panelists, and could I ask all of our speakers, responders and panelists to now put their cameras on so that the audience can see all of the whites of our eyes. So if I can welcome back Sarah, Anne, Rahima and Andrew, and they're joined by 3 panelists, Lynn Castles, Naveed Bakish and Kevin Lafferty, and I'm going to just come to each of you in turn just to give your thoughts on what you've heard today. 2 or 3 minutes please, and then once we've heard from you, I have some polls which I think will be interesting to the audience. So can we first of all hear from Lynn Castles. Lynn is from Lynn Brett Croft. She is a co-owner of the 61 hectare croft near Tomintoul, Strathspey, and with her partners won many awards for their approach to nature-friendly farming. Lynn, perspective from you.
Well, I'm feeling particularly smug being here, considering Sarah Ann telling me that Grantown-on-Spey is like the best place in the world, because I'm only 4 miles from there. So that's the first thing. Thank you very much for having me here. I just have 2 thoughts, or should I say 2 questions for you all out there. The first one is, we talk so much about nature, but how do we define it? What is nature? We often see nature as something that's outside. I'm looking right now at trees and hill ground, and that's nature. But we forget to acknowledge and accept the fact that actually we are nature. Our bodies are a part of nature, and therefore what it is that we put into our bodies is incredibly important. There's a famous scientist called Dr. Christine Jones, and she said an individual today would need to consume twice as much meat, 3 times as much fruit, and 4 to 5 times as many vegetables to obtain the same amount of minerals and trace elements as available in those same foods in 1940. So not only are we experiencing less nature, we're actually eating less nature, which is what makes us. So that's the first thing. The second point that I'd like to raise is, what is the language of nature? So we talk about it a lot, but we use phrases like access to nature rather than living in nature. And we also talk about managing nature rather than working with nature. And language is incredibly powerful. The more that we say it, we can often believe it. So those are the two of the things that I wanted to share with you today that I've been thinking about.
Lynn, thank you very much. Great to hear those thoughts. I'm now going to turn to Naveed Bakish, and Naveed is founder of Boots and Beards, which is the award-winning Glaswegian hill walking group, and later its sister organisation Bonnie Boots for women. His focus is giving opportunity to all to connect with nature. So Nav, over to you.
Hi everyone. Hi, I'm Nav. I'm the co-founder of Boots and Beards, our grassroots charity called based in Glasgow, city of Glasgow, and this is my son just walking behind me from his cycle ride. So pretty much, oh, he's going back out. So from what we've heard just now, I just want to kind of give you a brief overview of how we came about, which is purely accidental, and that was that. I am from also the south side of Glasgow. I am father of 4 boys who just walked past. He was 13 years old. My youngest is 7 years old. We have quite a big family. Asian families don't tend to be quite big anyway. But having a chat with my cousin Cash one day, I said, listen, do you know what? The kids are getting too big these days. We don't see each other very often. It's either Christmas, birthdays or funerals or weddings, that's it. Let's do something together. And he goes, what did you have in mind, Cash? I go, what do you have in mind now? I goes, why don't we just go hill walking? I've never done it before, but it can't be that hard. It's not something Asians do, is go hill walking. So we picked one Sunday, we literally dragged all the kids out. We gave the mums a break. And you know what? We actually had a really good time. And it's only until Cash had put some pictures up on social media that other families and other friends started saying, next time you guys go out, give us a shout. At that time, you thought, you know what, it's a family thing. We like this set up. Let's not invite anybody outside because we don't know what they're going to bring to the bag. And as we went out every fortnight, we actually tapped into a niche community, and there was a growth of people wanting to escape from the city to go to the hills. We're quite blessed to be living near Loch Lomond, and 3 years ago, I wouldn't have even ventured out to Loch Lomond. And now I've kind of brought this passion to my house where my kids know what mucky books looks like, how walking sticks are lying around, what that means to me. And I just want to share that experience with the rest of the community. And I think we've kind of want to get more and more of the Asian community out to the hills. So that's what Boots and Beer is all about, and how that's helped us as a community kind of get healthier and more acceptable to Scottish landscape.
Thanks very much, Nav. Great to hear about that. And we're going to hear very briefly from our final panelist, and then we will go to Rachel, who has managed to break through the technology to join us. So Kevin Lafferty is Health Policy Advisor at Scottish Forestry and has been there since 2007. And one of his many accomplishments is writing for Forest Research, which was instrumental in the innovative NHS Green Space demonstration project at the Forth Valley Royal Hospital. Kevin, over to you.
Thank you. Well, just picking up on a couple of the key themes, I think I'm going to talk about some of the challenges, basically. I think the outdoors is really beneficial to people, and we know that people who visit the outdoors feel better. But the past year has highlighted some key inequalities and highlighted that we need a more inclusive outdoors. So some sectors of society are benefiting more than others. And there's been a new term coined for this. It's called the ecogenic effect. And it really is looking at the disparity in terms of access. So some people are really benefiting, but if we look at underrepresented groups, we know that Black and minority ethnic communities and groups are not having the same level of opportunity. We also know that lower socioeconomic groups and people living with a physical or mental disability are more disadvantaged in terms of the opportunities. So that's a challenge for us. How do we facilitate and enable that to change for the better? I think the other thing that I wanted to highlight is that we have a lot of single-use assets in this country. And one of the big debates that's happened due to COVID in the Southern Hemisphere has been around golf courses, where communities have actually taken over golf courses for walking, for recreation, for exercise, and they're challenging this concept of single-use assets. Who benefits from these single-use assets? Is it more wealthy, white, middle-aged professionals? And should that be the case moving forward, or do we need to have more of a diversity in terms of land ownership and land access? And then I think finally, just want to say that we have an ageing demographic in Scotland. More older people, are we actually designing the outdoors to enable them to be accessible for more of our grandparents? So we have a saying in forestry, if it's fit for your granny, it's fit for everybody. And we need more of the outdoors to be fit for our granny. How do we meet that challenge? Lots of vigorous routes out there, but not enough all abilities or fully capable routes for people to use who are not that fit or maybe have some issues with their physical fitness. So I'll stop there, Francesca.
Thanks very much, Kevin. So we've heard from a range of contributors on the benefits of nature to health, rights, responsibilities, issues of access, the definition of nature itself, and how we can ensure that nature is accessible to all, whether that's people from Black and ethnic minorities or indeed Kevin's granny. So if you'd like to just reflect on those points, we will now go to Rachel. I'm delighted that Rachel Marsh author and writing instructor, has been able to join us. She's managed to break the code and access this Zoom event, and Rachel is reading an extract from Braemania, A Village's Story of Nature and Myth. Rachel, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Thank you. So this piece comes from a community project, which I believe there's more about in the chat. So I'm just going to go ahead and get into the excerpt, which was written by 5 different people and edited by myself. The photos on the screen are courtesy of Braemar Media. From the lounge window, Liz couldn't see more than a few feet ahead due to the cascading snow. She hesitated before leaving. Perhaps if she waited, the snow would subside. Just then, her phone beeped. She needed to get to the other side of the village. Grabbing her backpack, she headed out. Chunks of crunchy snow bordered black ice. The howling wind, studded with hailstones, blew straight at her. She bent over to protect her face from the onslaught. Liz expensive boots with the reversible studs in the sole, as Chapel Bray was like a skating rink. As she approached the roundabout, the snow moved from falling snows to stones to big flakes, but they were still thick in the air. Yet she had no longer needed to stoop. Taste Cafe was to her left. Patrons were strolling out of the cafe, pulling up their hoods to protect them from the flurries. Liz pulled up her own hood to stop her hair from getting wet. She gave a little shiver as she set off towards the village hall. She had wished she had time to stop for a coffee. There was a sudden change in the air. The temperature was rising fast. The ice on the pavement began to melt, and she could pick up her pace. The snowflakes were fading into a slow, cold drizzle. Liz glanced at her watch. Yet, just as she did, she nearly slipped on the wet leaves beneath the slush. As she steadied herself, the weather changed once again. The rain was warm against her cold cheeks. The archivist had spent her life in Glasgow and had never been the outdoors type. Holidays were spent in cities, Berlin, Dubai, New York. Prior to moving to Braemar, she had never considered the architecture of a village. She had assumed it would all be the same, stone cottages and bothies. As Liz traversed Braemar's few streets, she noticed how the village hall's gingerbread molding was in contrast to the home across the road, Juniper Cottage. One of the oldest cottages in the village, even on a bleak day, it was an inviting little haven in a haze of raindrops. She had seen old photos of the place. The roof had once been covered in turf, so different to the current grey slates, which had been quarried from up in Glengalter. Liz passed the row of houses beside the pharmacy and crossed to the Mews, a reminder of horses and carriages that once arrived at the majestic Fife Arms Hotel, which stood proudly in the village centre. As she crossed the entrance, the sun peeked through the rain. A rainbow formed over the east cromlins. A familiar face exited the Fife Arms across the road. Edward's yellow raincoat was dry and reflected the late morning light. He walked with purpose towards Clooney Bridge without even noticing her. As she kept her distance behind him, he turned left towards the castle. For a moment, she considered following him. The strange Frenchman stranded in Braemar. Did he even know the castle was closed? Her phone beeped. It was Sophia, the local GP. She didn't have time to give tourist advice. The doctor was waiting for her at the caravan park. As Liz walked from Glenshee Road towards Castleton Hall, the sun finally broke through, shimmering between the leaves on the trees. The lime trees that lined Castleton Terrace took on a hue that would, in a few months, match the trees' fruit. The water on the pavement was starting to evaporate in the sun, and she could finally walk at a brisker pace. However, her heavy parka, scarf, and hat were weighing her down. Stopping momentarily, she shoved her parka into her backpack and pulled out a bottle of water that had bits of ice floating in it. Liz took a swig. The heat made the flower petals in the community boxes at the side of the road pop open. Snow still rested in the soil beneath the flower stems. It was good to feel the warm sun on her face. The steam rose from the pavement, and she wiped a bit of humidity from her brow. Looking over to Marone, the mountain was coming alive with bracken, moss, and heather. Bees buzzed past her nose, and a dragonfly, a butterfly, landed on a dandelion shoot at her feet. The sun passed against her face, flushing it red. The woolly jumper she'd left the house wearing was now a burden. The turtleneck of her jumper was moist from preparation.
perspiration, and the fabric pressed on her chest with the heat of a newborn lamb. She passed Braemar Lodge, the punter spilling out onto the beer garden, beads of condensation dripping down pints of lager. She couldn't stand it any longer, so she pulled off the jumper, revealing nothing but a black vest. Her arms now laden with her winter wardrobe, she neared the road that turned to the youth hostel. Dark clouds came quickly over the hill, blocking out the sun. A chill ran across her shoulders. Was that a flutter of snow on her nose? 4 seasons in one day. Thank you much.
That was absolutely lovely. Thank you very much, Rachel, for those inspiring words and also the beautiful images, which were great to see. Okay, we've got until about 5:20, the panel discussion, and then we'll have our next interlude before we go into the interactive Q&A with the audience. And I thought we could maybe just start that by, if we could have up, Gloria, the first poll, the benefits of nature, and if that could come up on the screen. So if people could, audience could fill this in, what do you see as the greatest benefits from nature? And this picks up many of the themes that we've heard from our panelists, whether it is being passive in nature, whether it's exercise, whether it's working. And we'll give you about a minute to do that. But while people are completing that poll, I wonder if we could hear again from some thoughts. Rahima, you touched on the different aspects of being in nature and what people derive from that. And I just wonder if you could maybe comment on this question. And just to give due warning, I'm then going to come to Lynn, who raised a great provocation about why we talk about accessing nature rather than experiencing it, being it. We are ourselves nature. But Rahima first, benefits.
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree with Lynn. I started off saying that I think the issue is not how do we access nature, but the fact that we are a part of nature, and that it is essential to us as humans to have some form of connection with nature. Although I see everything on the chat about the issues around stress for people working in rural areas, especially. So I think there's the literature that Sarah Ann talked about, the evidence for how nature and green space are good for our health is fairly well established. And we know a little bit less about how that works and about how these different kinds of experiences in nature can influence us. And it seems that there are different possibilities for people in different ways. So the idea of passively engaging with some kind of nature is the sort of thing you might have in a hospital where you see a view of nature, whereas pausing and actually opening up to nature is more like the forest bathing that's being promoted from Japan now, which is so often we put our earbuds in and we go and we walk very quickly and we're not really stopping and listening and smelling and noticing the small things, not just the landscape. So that's now being understood to be very good for our psychological as well as our physiological well-being. And then we talked about, there's been some talk about work in nature and about activities in nature, but there are different kinds of activities in nature. And so food growing for me is as much an activity in nature as walking nature or some kind of wild exercise activity. And then finally, this idea of bringing nature in, I think sometimes we feel that we have to have these big rural landscapes, but even in urban areas, it's possible to create quite small micro places where you can notice nature and you can see seasonal changes. And that's very useful, for example, in schools in urban areas.
Thanks, Rahima. And while Lynn kind of gives her reflections on the benefits from nature and the poll, the greatest benefits from nature through the activities listed, we can maybe get the results of that while Lynn's commenting. Here we go. Lynn, I don't know if you can see that and if you want to give any reflections on what you see.
Okay, yeah, I'm just pulling it up now. It's interesting that sensing nature, that's very apt. That sensing nature is kind of giving the greatest benefits. Yeah, I mean, Rahima, I think we're both singing from exactly the same hymn sheet. It is so lovely to hear your words. And I think really I want to just maybe go back to a little bit and expand, Francesca, on what my points were, what my kind of provoking questions were. And first of all, one, the access to seeing nature as something separate to us, when actually we are nature, we are a part of nature. And sometimes accessing nature can be just stopping in our own minds, which is something we're not very good at doing these days, because we're on smartphones, or hey, we're on Zoom calls, who knows, whatever. But we've got so many distractions nowadays that stop us from just being in our own heads and being happy there. And that's a massive topic of conversation that we could go into, but not for right now. So that's kind of one of the things about the access point. And then I think it is really important to continue to talk about our language of nature and how we define nature. And this sort of approach of always kind of feeling that we have to control it or we have to manage it. And it's just about thinking what it is that we're actually trying to achieve by doing that. Whereas if we were to shift the language and really use what I believe is a much more empowering phrase of working with, it's really engendering that level of harmony, and it's really engendering what I believe is a very strong respect for the animals and insects and wildlife and soil biota, everything that we share this world with. So that's my kind of thoughts on that.
Great, thanks, Lynn. And those are very interesting results to the poll. So sensing nature comes out very clearly as being seen as the greatest health benefit. And I saw lots of comments through the chat in terms of studies relating to the health benefits of nature and how those health benefits are derived. Another interesting feature that I felt came through all of the contributions was the balance of rights and responsibilities in terms of our green spaces, our landscapes. And I think we have a poll on that, Gloria. So again, we'll just pull that up, and while we're hearing from some of our contributors, if people could contribute to this poll. And on this one, just one answer, please. You can't tick all that apply. It's you need to give a definitive view on whether you think we have got the balance right between rights and responsibilities in Scotland's natural places. And Andrew, you referenced some of the issues in terms of access to green space and access to the countryside that we saw at the end of the summer last year. So I'll maybe come to you first, and then happy for other panelists to jump in. Andrew, what's your thought on this question?
Thank you, Francesca. I think my view is pretty straightforward. You can't have one without the other, and it's got to be a balance of the two. I think people have got rights, they're entitled to have their rights, but with that right comes a responsibility, and they have to recognise that. And I believe that's what education should be able to deliver. People need to understand that. And I mean, there's questions going on in the chat there about a place in the curricula at schools and that. I think we need to get people to believe and understand that, because I think Lynn's points about nature, they need to understand what it is. It's actually what we as farmers, we as crofters are doing. It's actually working with nature. We are part of that environment. We are part of the ecosystem, and we want to retain and be part of that ecosystem, but we don't want to damage it, because that health that we're generating and the wealth that we're generating with the food we're producing and actually helping develop nature needs to be understood. And then people, and again, Rahima mentioned it, and I think I'm a big fan of this, is actually the Japanese immersion techniques. And it was forest immersion, I think it was about the Japanese are developing. Get out there and use all your senses. Don't just go out there with the earbuds in and run through the countryside. Take it all in. But the responsibilities that comes with being in that environment, you could damage nature, you could actually damage somebody's income. But as a farmer, as a crofter, I see potential in being able to invite people in, understand that. They might even become an earner for us. Understand that and go away with a bit of enthusiasm for what they've seen and want to get more of it, and again, I mentioned it earlier, then being able to supply it and source local food and understand the seasonality. You're buying into the whole story. But for a small wee excuse at the end of it, I think there's a lot of potential that's being missed out, even in having a plot of land of your own, a small plot of your own, within the city environment, and growing your vegetables, growing sunflowers, and appreciating that, because I think that would have a massive health benefit as well. It doesn't all need to be the great big outdoors. There's other opportunities.
Yeah, agree with that. Andrew, I want to come to Kevin next, because I think from a Scottish forestry perspective, and as an organisation that manages land, this balance between rights and responsibilities might be something that Kevin wants to comment on. But there's a question in the chat by who are we talking about when we're saying rights and responsibilities? And I'm talking about the general public. So we have a right of access for the general public across Scotland, and people are exercising that right. But as Andrew has said, with that right comes a degree of responsibility. So that's my interpretation of the question. And while Kevin's speaking, we will kind of close the poll and display the results. But Kevin, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think in the access world, how we describe it is we have angels and we have devils, and we have about 80% of the people in the middle who want to do the right thing. So there's a very small minority of people who cause the issues, and that has to be tackled and challenged. But I think in terms of the Scottish Outdoor Access Code, we've got the balance right in this country, and what we've got to recognise is that other countries across the UK look to Scotland and they really envy the position that we have. And I think, you know, this idea of having a multi-purpose asset. So if we think about our paths and trails, you can ride your bike, you can walk, you can go horse riding. And it's really about people just understanding their individual responsibility and accommodating other people. So I think that is something we should be proud of. I wanted to touch briefly on the forest therapy and forest bathing, because I think one of the things we haven't touched on is just in this busy urban life that we live, the importance of silence and slowness. And I think silence and slowness comes with immersion in nature. And one of the things, the real benefits that we're seeing now in the literature is around that transformative experience that can have for people, in particular for people who have not had that opportunity previously. So people living in poverty, people who are maybe coming from underrepresented groups who've not visited the countryside before. And it can be an experience of awe, it can be inspirational and create wonder, and even can be mystical. So we have to give more people the chance to benefit and take those opportunities. So we still have a lot of the same people enjoying the outdoors. We need a wider cross-section of society to get more opportunities, and our access rights give us that opportunity.
Great, thanks, Kevin. And I'm just looking to see what the result of the poll is. So the result is a little too much emphasis on the rights, but possibly not on the responsibilities. So that's an interesting reflection there. So final topic for the panel before we go to the next interlude. Could we perhaps have poll 7, which is motivations to go outdoors? And I was struck by the comments that Nav made about accessibility. It's something that comes up in my own work. How do we ensure equality of access to nature? Kevin mentioned future-proofing this for his granny, or if we're future-proofing, possibly for his grandchildren. But thinking about what inspires people to go outdoors, how can we encourage access to nature with the appropriate balance of rights and responsibilities? So who'd like from the panel just to give some comments on that? And while we hear from the panel again, if people could check all boxes that apply in the poll, what would encourage you to go outdoors more? Nav, would you like to come in on this?
I just, again, I can talk from my own experience. coming into this hobby 3 years ago, why did we come into this? And why has the Asian community just woken up? I mean, the Asian community in Scotland has been here for about 50 odd years, but why has hill walking or the outdoors not been an activity that they've taken on before? And why now? And I think now is probably a good time to have that dialogue with national parks and outdoor organisations to have better representation. So when you have maybe on print media on the website, you have maybe a change of what was the word I'm looking for? Have some more kind of diverse backgrounds as your images. It might appeal to some of the Asian community. Say, do you know what? I've seen that, or do you know what? Maybe the Scotland community, maybe the Scottish outdoor community is not just for middle class white. It's for me as well. I have access to that as well, and I think it involves groups like us to share more pictures of us going out hill walking. So there is a bit of onus on us to do that to do our duty to encourage that. But I like what Andrew said. There needs to be a lot of education. People. I mean, Scotland has got a lot of diverse communities. A lot of people have come from other countries and settled in Scotland. And yes, they might come from climates where they have got lovely landscape in their country as well, but they might not know the rules of what is rights and responsibilities in this country. So there is education need to be done, and that's maybe something which maybe the Scottish Government or something which, again, the national parks have got to maybe invest money into, and maybe have more signs up in different languages, or just put out more publications to say this is what you have got access to all this, but these are your rights and responsibilities. This is what you need. You need to respect other people's private space, and this is what you can do, you cannot do. And I think most diverse communities will be happy to respect that and follow by the rules. But I think there needs to be some sort of education done initially. But that's just my own experience.
Great, thanks, Nav. And I'm going to come to Sarah Ann for the final word in this session, given that she kicked us off so beautifully. And then while Sarah Ann is speaking, perhaps we can close the poll and show the results. But Sarah Ann, my kind of terrible chairing means we are a little behind time. So just a couple of sentences, please. And you can see the results of the poll there. So encouragement to use the great outdoors, better public transport. That's a surprise to me in some ways, though I can see it in others given the challenges for some of our urban communities. But Sarah Ann, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's probably two things I would pick up on, and I think that especially from my experience, that childhood experience is so important. And I think initiatives like our forest schools, forest nurseries, these are like laying the foundations, I would say, for people to continue to be using outdoor spaces for health and well-being as they move into adulthood. But I think kids are also fantastic ambassadors, and in terms of actually getting their families and their parents out into the outdoors as well. So I think that's a really key thing. I think one of the things that sticks with me from recent qualitative work as well is we were asking people if what is that key barrier. A lot of people have come back and said, I don't have anyone to go with. And I think that's a really sad thing, that people they don't want to go on their own. So we need to try and connect people into whether that's through social prescribing, community groups, opportunities for people to just have a buddy or a group that they can actually go with and take that first step in terms of accessing for themselves.
Great, thanks, Sarah Ann, and hold these thoughts because the questions from the Q&A are coming in, and there's some really interesting questions around access to green space. So that's a theme to which we will return after the next interlude, which is a short film from Jill de Fresnes and Ruth Barry, and is called Among the Trees, the Foresters of the Gosford Estate. So if we could have this interlude, please.
There's not a person that comes in here that doesn't like trees. I mean, people come in, they love the trees. I've never met anybody who says they don't like trees. Everybody loves trees. And people, I mean, sometimes you're tempted to hug them yourself, but you don't want to get a reputation like that, you know.
The first memory of this place was a Saturday morning, and we were asked to take a tree down further up the pond there. And we came in on a sunny day, and we just thought, we never knew the pond
This place existed, no?
Till we saw it, and we were just blown away with it. You know, I mean, just couldn't believe. I lived in the area all my life and had never seen anything like this.
And the same way this used to be covered in ducks as well.
I was just got to say that when we first come here, this area here, you could hardly see water for ducks.
When we met old Lord Beams decided that he loved his forestry. He really loved being in the wood, you know. Something, I mean, he loved it that much. Sometimes we'd big fires going in the wood. We'd leave him at night time, it lashing the rain. He'd just lie down beside the fire, you know. We'd walk away, leave in the rain, say, Lord, are you going to be okay there? I'm fine, he says, you know, be lying in the rain. He decided every day for 8 years he'd be with us every single day. There's not a day he didn't. We went on holiday, John. What like was we were going on holiday?
Oh, he was.
He says, I'm sad you're going on holiday. What am I going to do when you're going on holiday? You know, he says. And when we come back, the people often say, listen, we're going to ban you for going on holiday because we've had enough of him. Want something to do, you know. But it wasn't like you see it today. I mean, the island there was just like a jungle. There was no path through it, you know. So in 8 years of working with him every single day, open up all these places, open all the dowagers walking at us, I mean, doing that.
Aye. Well, Lord Williams, when we started working with him, he had all the old maps, all the old right-of-ways, and he used to measure everything accurately because he used to measure it in the old Scotch chain. So the paths would all be right round haw-haw walls, sunken walls. So he measured everything to the wall, to where the path should be, and reinstated everything in its proper place.
But this is a great big gospel. These old-fashioned mature trees are still here, you know. They're taking a fair hammer of the wind these days, and they've become the end of their life. A lot of the big beaches, big monsters are starting to lose limbs at the top and things like that, you know. And over the years, they'll have to come down, you know, because we have to worry about public safety and things like that, you know. But it's good to keep them going for bats and things like that in these old trees, because you've got a sycamore tree or anything like that. Bats can't live in these places, you know. So you need these old trees to be about, you know. The older we get, we don't want to take big trees down, you know, because we think that something that takes 200 years to grow, you know. We'll sit in the big stump once we fell a big tree, we'll sit and say, this started for a wee seed, we'll hold the seed like that, you'll say, look, what's in this wee seed to produce this big cathedral, you know what I mean? So you'll see a lot of trees with big here, you'll see them with big limbs off them. People start to take that down, plant another tree, you'll say, let that go away like it and leave it for another 50 years or something, you know. And let the normal bacteria get into it and do its job of producing bracket fungus and all these sort of things, you know. So these are things you have to leave in the wood to keep the biodiversity going and things like that, you know. We look at them every day, and every day we'll walk the forest the weekend. Our weekends will be spent camping in the forest and walking the forest. And it's a lovely material. It's got its own uses. Each tree has got its own uses in history for making brakes and things like that, you know, making, if you're using old wagons, you would use poplar because the wood bends more. If you use beech, it would break when you put, I mean, so they all have their own characteristics and usage in our society, you know. We need more of that all over Scotland. We are under-forested, we really need more, you know. And they have to be looked after for all these years, 200 years, you know.
Every job we get sent today, it's to improve it's to make an improvement or stop something getting worse. So you're leaving something for the future. You know what I mean? It is a good feeling. You're doing it and you think, well, somebody will appreciate in years to come who did this. You know what I mean?
That was absolutely lovely. And there's obviously a theme of panelists and contributors being close to the artistic interludes, because that's not that far along the coast from me. So the next time I cycle past, which I do very regularly, I will have a look for some of those fabulous trees. Okay, we're going to come to the Q&A. I'd like to get through as many of the questions as possible. So if I could ask all our panelists to be as brief as they can in their answers. I know they'll have a lot to say. But the first question, which I sort of hinted at before the interlude, quite a few people have raised similar type issues. Stas MacLeod, James Ogilvie, Nick Domini, and Ronald MacDonald. And I would summarise it by, is access to green space mainly for the privileged? Is it therefore more of a benefit for the privileged? Who'd like to take that? Right. Oh, great. Hands up. Lynn.
Some big questions. Well, it's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting because just as we were watching those two guys from Gosford, who are now my absolute heroes, I was reading through the chat, and there was 2 points that I think are very relevant to make in response to that question. The first is from a guy called Alan on the chat, who said, we seem to see nature as the countryside, but we need to think more about the nature in the cities that we, who are a part of nature, have created. And that everybody should be able to have a natural feeling within walking distance. You know, sometimes we might be walking within buildings, but if we look up, we can see the skies above us. That's nature. And the second point was one that Adele made. She said, accessing our own inner nature is as important as anything else.
Brilliant, thanks, Lynn. And Kevin, you were also jumping to answer this question.
Yeah, I think the COVID pandemic's really highlighted that, you know, for the people who live in high rises and flats and more urbanized areas, they really haven't had the same level of opportunity. And having some sort of green space or place standard that would make it more equitable, I think, is something we have to consider in terms of future policy. I also think what's really important is actually looking at urban tree canopy cover and street trees. Now, we're living off of the Victorian pioneers who basically invested heavily in this infrastructure. The infrastructure is very tired and degraded. And I suppose the challenge is, how do we get that investment, that mixture of investment, to revitalise green space in our towns and in our cities, and in particularly not in the morning sides or the West Ends, but, you know, in the East End of Glasgow and the Craig Millers of Edinburgh. This is where we need to be investing more in the green space and really providing that opportunity.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. And Andrew.
Is there not an opportunity here to maybe start talking about the possibility of school gardens? I mean, I think it's a thing that used to exist a long time ago, but is there not that ability just to get something in there? And I know it would tie in with what was being spoken about earlier, about trying to get people to understand and engage with nature. I think there'd be an opportunity there. It would also, it would tie in with the link of how food is produced and the value that food has got. So I'm maybe dreaming a bit, but I genuinely feel that there's some real value could be got out of doing something along that line, even if it's a raised bed or something, that would actually get people engaged with that.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. And I think what this has highlighted and what this conversation continues to highlight for me is about the inequality of access to nature. And we probably shouldn't think of it just as a rural-urban divide. I think there was some comments in the chat from people in rural areas where there's still not that kind of ability to access nature. But Rahima, you'd mentioned in, I think, some of your comments, the importance of being able to bring nature in. Is there anything you want to add to what you've heard?
Yeah, I think from I think, again, just echoing some of the comments that there have been about it not needing to be these massive landscapes, but also being able to see nature in just a flower that might actually be opening up, and so people can bring these things in. But I also think there's something there from what was just mentioned with the sort of previous question as well, is that being able to see nature isn't going to solve society's problems, and that there's more that we need to address as well, and that this is part of a whole process to allow people to be able to develop their own well-being, to develop connection with others as well as connection with nature. So there's something here about not seeing people in isolation, but also seeing people as part of communities, and about communities together supporting a drive towards well-being. So I think bringing nature in is a part of that, but it's not going to solve all of the challenges that we have in society at the moment.
Thanks, Rahima. And your mention there of the importance of community is a brilliant segue into another set of questions that we've had. So David, Leslie and Willie Towers asked questions on a similar theme here, which is the different types of engagement with nature and the importance of company. And Sarah Ann, you'd referenced this. So do we know anything about the difference in health benefits or other benefits of engaging with nature and in company, or passive versus active engagement? So for example, the difference between a stroll through a nature reserve compared to volunteering in a group, or being with company, how that can trigger wider benefits. Who'd like to take on that set of issues? Sarah Ann, you're smiling, so I'm going to come to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's what we're getting at is there are really multiple dimensions to health and well-being. So there's these real different sets of ways in which interaction with nature can impact on those. I think one of the really interesting things is about, there's lots of research around what might be the dose of nature be that's effective. And studies have shown that it can be quite a short interaction with nature that actually brings some of the restorative benefits. It can be as short as like a 5-minute walk through a park or a woodland space that brings you some of those relaxation, anxiety reduction benefits. I think for a lot of people that social element is really strong. So if you can be actively involved in nature alongside other people, you're kind of getting a double benefit there, because you're getting the benefit of the social interaction as well.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. Thank you, Sarah. And anybody else want to comment on this? Or shall I move on to the next question? Rahima?
Yeah, I think I agree absolutely with Sarah Ann. I think there is evidence that people doing activities together or in nature and working with nature, as Lynn would say, can be really beneficial. But I think that there's also a connection with place, and I think that was mentioned in the chat earlier, is that these kinds of activities can also center people's experience in place and that sense of belonging, which is also really important to our mental well-being. So I think that that's important as well.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to move on to the next question, and there's been a few comments about how we value nature, whether that's intrinsically or whether that's via monetary values. And there's a question from Colin Mackenzie. We are nature, we are made of it, so we should be demanding a better connection to it, but the market doesn't shout for it, it'll take the lowest cost. So how can we perhaps use the market or change our view of economics to ensure that nature is properly valued? And actually, while we're answering this question, Could we maybe have up poll 6, which is about paying for green space? So we'll let that run while we tackle the question of valuing nature. Should we put a value on it? Who wants to go there? Kevin.
There's a very lively debate just now in research circles around natural capital accounting and how we value nature. So I think for the audience, there's different ways of doing this. You can look at avoided costs, you can look at well-being, but I think there's no way for us to get away from this, that there's going to be a debate and a discussion around the value of nature. I think what we just have to do is make sure we take a nuanced and an informed approach. So we can't just come at this from an economic perspective. What we have got to look at is sustainability, environment, and the health and well-being benefits. But if people haven't seen it, there's been a lot of publication on natural capital accounting, and it's something we've been doing in Scotland for a number of years. And they're trying to refine at the moment some of the, I suppose, the mechanisms of how we actually measure and value nature. And mental health in forests is one that I'm actively involved in with myself at the moment. And Sport England and Sport Scotland have been looking at the exercise benefits of recreation. So if people want some more information, Francesca, we can share some of those links. But I think there is there's a very lively debate at the moment around natural capital accounting. And should we or shouldn't we be doing this? And I would open that or push it back to the audience.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Lynn.
Okay, I'm on mute. Yeah, so valuing nature, that's a really, really interesting one. And so I would put it to everybody that as a society, we actually already have attributed a value to nature. And I would say that that's directly in relation to the value on which we put towards the food that we eat. It's commonly spoken about that food is dominated, the food marketplace is dominated by cheap food. And actually, I'm pretty sure Andrew's going to agree with me on this, but in Scotland, I think we produce some of the absolute best food in the world to some incredible standards. And therefore, I would say to you that if you wanted to increase the value that you attribute to nature, maybe you could actually act on that by better purchasing produce that is from your local farmer who farms with nature. Maybe they're organic, maybe they have a good certification, but maybe that's a way that you can turn your aspiration and what it is that you value into an actual practical action.
Great, we're all for practical action, Lynn. Thank you very much. Andrew, I could see you twitching earlier, so yes, please come in.
Lynn obviously led me into this one, so she did, Francesca. But I think she's absolutely spot on, and I think it would also, the food miles aspect, she never mentioned food miles in particular, but I think that could be a big part of this story. But we need to get people onto the land and understand how we are producing that food, and then getting them to value it, to pay that bit more to get that value out of it. I also think, as I would say, land managers, if there is a desire to change the use of that land, it should not be an income forgone, but it should be based on outcomes achieved. We've had the outcome forgone for too many years. It's not actually encouraged things. I think if you're going to put any kind of monetary value on this, for this natural capital, of changing what the natural capital is and what you're farming or crofting, you need to do it on an outcome rather than trying to base it. And it should be rewarded properly for that as well, because that would be a public good being delivered.
Great, thanks, Andrew. And if we could maybe have the results of the poll. So that certainly sparked off quite a good debate in the chat, and thinking about, well, nature is ours already, green space is ours, why should we pay? But interesting in the results there that there is certainly amongst this audience a willingness to pay through the tax system, but not per user. So very interesting. If you're interested in natural capital, that is going to be a strong theme of the next conversation. So we've got time for one last question, and all panelists, I put you on notice. This is the one question where I'm going to allow everybody to give a view, but a very short view. And we've seen again through the chat and in the Q&A, James Ogilvie has said, made a legal requirement a first for Scotland. I'm not sure what he's meaning as a legal requirement, but I'm assuming it is a right to nature or a right to the benefits of nature. So can I just come back to the topic of this conversation, which is how we derive health benefits from nature and how we can ensure that those are available to all. How can we expand social prescribing so that we replace medication which treats symptoms with positive environmental, social connections which tackle causes of issues such as isolation and loneliness? And that comes from John Thorne. So yeah, how do we expand health interactions with nature as a means of prevention rather than cure? And let's go. Nav, do you want to have a first stab at that?
What we've noticed is that, again, talking from the groups that we've taken out, what we've noticed is that the community that we take out, they tend to come out in groups. They never come out individually. And whether they feel confident in doing that, whether that gives them to socialise at the same time, it gives them an excuse to come out and just away from the kids or whatever, but we've realised that groups tend to be more encouraging and a reason for them to come out and enjoy the outdoors. And our philosophy, our process has always been, if you get them out in groups and get them comfortable with the outdoors, then you know what, later on they'll come out on their own, or they'll bring their other family members with them. So what that works for us, to get them out in small groups, get them to know about navigation courses, about the health and safety, what will happen if this is what you get from foraging, this is what you can pick from. So there's a lot of stuff out there, even ranger service, there's a lot of stuff out there which we can tap into, but we don't. But again, it all comes down to the bigger organisations kind of playing their part and encouraging them and having services there for them to tap into. So there is a lot of stuff we can do that we're not doing.
Okay, great, thanks, Nav. So I'll come to Kevin. Nature, prevention rather than cure, how do we do it?
Yeah, I think we have to mainstream and then embed this approach. I think if we look at the significant areas of spend in Scotland, over 1/3 of the block grant from Westminster, over £12.5 billion per year, is spent on healthcare. We should be using more of that for green space as preventative upstream treatment. You know, this is about really preventing people from getting ill by having regular recreation and nature. And our Chief Medical Officer, Gregor Smith, is a real advocate and a supporter of our Natural Health Service. So we need a more holistic approach to health. It cannot just focus on end of life and treating illness and disease. We have to concentrate more on health promotion and really enhancing the population's health. And I think spending on green space, a green space standard or equality, and trying to invest in that in our towns, our cities and our communities will really improve the health of the population. And I think that's money well spent. And I'll finish by giving you a quick example. Forth Valley Royal Hospital cost over £300 million to build. It cost less than £500,000 to basically revitalise and transform the outdoor estate. Now, the people who work there value the outdoor estate extremely highly, and they think that was the best money that the NHS spent. So let's have some more of that spend.
Okay, so bend the spend from Kevin. Thank you very much. Andrew.
I think Nav covered a lot of what I was thinking, and I'll throw in, I agree with him on the Rangers, but probably a prescription, being prescribed, and then having a group or some sort of a ranger service available for the people that are being prescribed this. If we could make something work along that way, or even mentors that would give people the companionship to get them out to understand and explain to them where they are, and that would maybe drive more, and then maybe that might cascade further and wider into society. So I think I'd be quite keen to see a form of a NHS prescription for this.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Lynn, what are your thoughts on how we can have more prevention than cure using nature?
I'm going to stay in the same theme that I've kind of been pretty much on the whole time, and I'm going to say that if we're going down a kind of a prevention rather than cure, then food is medicine, and what I would say is know what it is that you're buying and value it.
Great, thank you very much, Lynn. And Rahima.
3 things very briefly. So I think it's not so much about taking people out into nature, but getting them to experience nature where they are as well. So I think it's about making sure that children in school get out. It's now a statutory right for children in Scotland to have outdoor learning. Great examples around: Secret Garden Outdoor Nursery, Falkland School does this fantastically. Secondly, I think it's about community activities, and I think this ties in with what Nav and to some extent Andrew were saying, and Sarah Ann. So, for example, community gardens such as Transition, Urban Roots does a fantastic job of this in Glasgow, in a deprived area. And the third thing is place development. And so just enhancing some of those existing places around people. So we've got the Lomans, we've got the national parks, but we're starting to see estates actually opening up and offering these kinds of opportunities for their local community as well as visitors.
Thank you, Rahima. And final word on this, Sarah, and let's have some short, pithy comments from you, Sarah Ann.
I think I'm going to come at it from a health perspective, just given my background. I mean, I agree very much with what Kevin was saying. I think it's about putting, the outdoors, nature, green health at the heart of public health and what public health is about in Scotland. And I think things like the Green Health Partnerships, which we have one of in Highland, which connects the environmental sector with NHS and with the third sector provision as well. That's the kind of mechanism that can help us do that. I'd like to see link workers trained in understanding the benefits of nature and how to facilitate that for different people, and potentially like moving towards some kind of green health qualification or professional role that could sit within public health.
Great, thank you, Sarah Ann. That concludes the Q&A, and I'm sorry we didn't get to everybody's questions, but there is a way that you can all continue to contribute, and I'm going to explain that and the mysteries of the Padlet after our final artistic interlude, which comes from Hamish Napier and David Russells and is called The Woods. This is a collaboration between David and Hamish, filmed at dawn at Loch Garten in Abernethy Forest. Now, please, everybody, don't go away, because after we've had this artistic treat, then I'll be telling you how the conversation will continue. Thank you.
moved back I was in Glasgow for 16 years, and I moved back to Strathspey, and I've been writing music inspired by the local area for the last couple of years, and there's so much to write about. So I grew up in Strathspey. I grew up right next to Angach Woods, and we often would come down to these Cally Pine Woods down here at Loch Garton and Loch Pachulish and Loch Morlich, and absolutely beautiful places. Used to go for a swim here, and my mother's an opera singer, so she would quite often bust out some of the opera chops, and her amazing voice would be echoing across the loch. There's a few times recently I've had my flute down at these places, and I've been playing it across the loch, so it's nice to come down here this morning and just hear how it's the sound of the flute bouncing around. I could see a wee tent round the corner. It must have been like, what's this, some sort of Celtic Mist album that's been made on the beach this morning. I'm making an album just now called The Woods, and it's my third album, and it's going to follow the Gaelic alphabet. So the Gaelic alphabet is taught, it's only 18 letters, and it's taught through the old names for the trees. And so I've written a piece of music for 18 of the native trees, and I was quite sad to see that the Scottish pine, the Caledonian Scots pine's not actually in the alphabet, so I just stuck it in there. I put it in there instead, so of something else. So for me, the pine woods are just the most beautiful part of what we have here in Strathspey. You get right out into the sort of solitude and peace and quiet, and surrounded by bird song, and so no, it's a lovely thing to be able to write music about your area. Some echo. I think one of the things that's really lovely about the creative process of making an album is the people that you meet. You meet lots of like-minded people. So when I was writing music about the river, I was finding lots of people to interview and talk to about their relationship with the river. And similarly, when I was writing about the railway, I met some old railway people, some old railwaymen, and interviewed them about what their life on the railway was like. And I've been doing a similar approach here with the woods, and it's finding people that have got an obsession with the woods. And having met David and chatting about, he's always going into Rothiemurchus and taking these shots, and it's like that's his inspiration. I really like the idea, the fact that it's always the same bit of forest, and like within that one bit of forest there's so many things, different ways to shoot it. I think he's got thousands of pictures of Rothiemurchus forest, so there's so much in that, and trying to just trying to find a way to communicate to people the feeling that you get when you're there. That's what, for me, that's what it's about. It's if you can, through photography or through poetry or through music, how you can actually convey to people the feeling that you get when you're in these beautiful wild places, and you can sort of capture that so that your music doesn't just sound like tourist music, or your photos don't just look like tourist photos. It's they've got something slightly different in them. There's something that's kind of there's something that quite personal about it, but also it's hard to describe. Do you know what I mean?
Thank you very much for that, and I'm sure we've all enjoyed the artistic interludes during this conversation. So it's now turned to me to conclude this session. If I could ask the panelists to put their cameras on so we can all thank you. This has been our fourth conversation, and these conversations have been incredibly rich. I'd like to thank all of our contributors this evening, Sarah Ann Munoz, Rahima White, Nav Bakesh, Andrew McCormack, Lynn Castle and Kevin Lafferty. Thank you all for your thought-provoking comments, and all the contributing artists, Karine Paulwert, Rachel Marsh, Jill de Fresnes, Ruth Barry, Hamish Napier and David Russell, and all our partners who've been part of putting on this event, including the James Hutton Institute, Open University, Bella Caledonia, and generous support from the Pebble Trust and Wildland Limited. Now, this is not the end of the story. And if I could ask the back of house team to put up the Padlet document, and you'll be thinking, Padlet, what is a Padlet? Well, this is a Padlet, and it is what we have captured from this evening's conversation, from the chat, from the Q&A, to really try and make some propositions and proposals on how we can further nature as a health benefit. And we will send out, and it's in the chat from Gail, the link to the Padlet so that you can contribute to this, you can continue to add to this, and it will be available on the CEDAR webpage for this event, and will be open for 1 week for contributions. So please, if you feel that your issues have not been addressed this evening, please access the Padlet and contribute to it. Now, what happens then is that the fabulous CEDAR team will condense all of these themes, and they will be circulated to policymakers. So this really is a way for you to feed in your views. And we hope that there will be events in the run-up to COP26 which can highlight some of the actions.